So I do want to give my brief opinion on the State of the Union address that was delivered yesterday by Donald Trump. And in general, I think he did a pretty good job. And I want to go over some of the main points that he talked about, general features of the speech. And my favorite part is probably going to be talking about all the response that he got, especially from the Democrats. So I really like the general tone that he took. He took the voice of a representative of the American people. He said things such as, "I represent the American people," or "on behalf of the American people." And this is in stark contrast to what Obama did in most of his State of the Unions. In fact, in his last one, he said "I," "me," "my" close to 200 times in a 40-minute speech, which equates to about every 12 seconds. Now, I'm not here to exonerate Trump from being a narcissist. He definitely is a narcissist. If you don't think that, you may be a little bit delusional yourself. But at least for him to take a step back from that and serve as a representative voice during the State of the Union speech, I thought it was a very good thing. On multiple occasions, he emphasized that everything that is in this country, all the greatness from the United States, belongs to the people, and that the government is there to protect, respect, and listen to the people. I thought that was very excellent of him to portray himself in that manner, because ultimately the president is supposed to be a representative of the people. We forget that because the government doesn't act that way. Certainly over the last decade or so, we seem to have forgotten that. One of the most powerful lines of the entire State of the Union, in my opinion, is when Donald Trump said towards the end that the people are what's making America great again. And that's a great way to finish a speech, because at first he was listing off all of the accomplishments that have taken place over the last year, and by finishing with that line, what he's ultimately doing is attributing all that success to the American people. In general, I find it pretty cheesy when they bring out these special guests for the State of the Union and try to make emotional appeals by talking about their personal stories, but I think Donald Trump integrated his guests very well during his speech. Specifically, he used them as examples to demonstrate this American resolve that he took as a tone for his speech. He talked about some of the national difficulties that we've had over the past year, specifically natural disasters, like the hurricanes and flooding in Houston and in Puerto Rico and the fires in California, and he utilized his guests very effectively to demonstrate how everyday Americans were primarily responsible for dealing with that damage and tragedy. He talked about the Coast Guard story and that firefighter story. He went on to honor Steve Scalise, who was shot by a political radical, and went on to thank everybody who was involved in his recovery, like the medics and the first responders and the doctors and the nurses. So I thought that was very well done. He expressed his admiration for the law enforcement and military like he always does as well. But the bulk of his State of the Union speech focused primarily on economy and immigration, and rightfully so, because most of his accomplishments came by way of the economy. In that regards, he started talking about all of the new jobs that have been created while he has been president. Specifically, I think he cited a figure of 2.4 million new jobs. He talked about rising wages and low unemployment rates for specific demographics. And really, when we talk about the economy, it's very easy to dismiss it towards your political bias. So for example, if the economy is doing well under a Republican president, it's easy to say that it was the previous Democrats that's responsible for the current job growth. Likewise, if the economy is not doing well, it's easy to dismiss the current administration's policies and blame it on the previous president's policy. It's very difficult to analyze what specifically is creating all this job growth. What specifically is creating the rising wages? Is it some of Obama's policies from his administration? Possibly. Or is it Donald Trump's changes that are causing these? Hard to say. There are way too many variables to be able to confidently say that Donald Trump is responsible for all these new jobs, or it's actually Barack Obama and his policies that are creating these jobs. What is true is that job growth was on the rise and unemployment was on the decline under Obama as well. This has simply continued over to the Trump administration. So I don't like to talk about 2.4 million new jobs or rising wages or lowest rates of unemployment ever recorded, because it's hard to attribute responsibility towards those. But there are some objective things that we can cite under the Trump administration that have been great for the economy. And that's really all that matters, because voters tend to live in the present. Regardless of whether Trump is responsible for the rising wages or new jobs or low unemployment, the voters will see it as such because they live in the present. If they're able to go out and get a job, if they're able to get higher wages, if they look at their community and the unemployment going down within that community, they tend to associate that with the current administration. So that's a very important distinction to note. But let's talk about some of the objective things that you can't argue with under the Trump economy. His tax reform plan is a huge win for all Americans, and specifically if you want to play the partisan politics game, it's a huge win for himself and the Republicans. Because of these tax cuts, which are the biggest tax cuts in American history, by the way, people are keeping more of their money, including the middle class. And the Democrats are visibly angry and upset at this in the State of the Union. Very quiet because they can't really challenge that. They can't compete with that. They want to say that all that money is going to the top and the CEOs, and that's just plainly not true. And the point is that voters are going to be seeing bigger paychecks. They're going to see less of their paychecks going to the federal government. And while the Democrats can get up there and say that all that money is only going to the CEOs, the voters will see right through it because they'll have the numbers right there in their pay stubs. Most Americans are going to be saving thousands of dollars on their taxes, and that's very significant. Nancy Pelosi wants to dismiss this as, quote, pocket change. You know, for somebody who's making as much money as she is, $1,000 may not mean much, but to the average American family that's trying to put their kids through an education and trying to make the monthly payments, that's a lot of money. It just goes to show how the Democratic Party has really become the party of the rich and are so out of touch with everyday Americans. However, the individual tax cuts is not the main thing of the tax reform. The main thing is the business tax reform, because that really is what's huge. It went down from 35% to 21%, which is really going to incentivize creativity in the marketplace. It's going to incentivize the formation of new businesses. It's going to incentivize the restructuring of current businesses, and that money does tend to go down to the employees. To date, over 250 companies have specifically cited the Trump tax plan as reasons for increasing their domestic investment, for creating new jobs, for handing out employee bonuses, for increasing wages. And you just can't argue with that. Waste Management handed $2,000 bonuses to over 30,000 employees. A heating and cooling firm from Oklahoma handed out $1,000 bonuses to over 2,000 employees. Alaska Air gave $1,000 bonuses to over 23,000 employees. All these companies, by the way, citing specifically the Trump tax plan. American Airlines spent $130 million giving $1,000 bonus to every one of their $128,000 employees. Walmart being the company that all the Democrats like to cite, right? The poor struggling single mother who works at Walmart and has to pick up extra jobs because they can't make ends meet. Well, Walmart announced a minimum wage increase to $11 and handed out a ton of bonuses. Again, citing the Trump tax plan specifically. Apple plans to invest $350 billion in the United States and hire an additional 20,000 workers. ExxonMobil citing the Trump tax plan as incentive to make a $50 billion investment in the United States. You got Starbucks as well handing out over $250 million in wage hikes and bonuses. And that's the trifecta, right? Walmart, Apple, and Starbucks. Your modern Marxist and Trump hater will go to Walmart to buy their Che Guevara t-shirt and then head down to their local Starbucks to buy a grande latte and sit on their Apple computer to rant on the internet about the evils of capitalism. Well, all three of their favorite companies specifically handing out bonuses and increasing wages, citing the Trump tax plan. Chrysler is moving a plant from Mexico back to Michigan now that the business conditions are more favorable. Toyota and Mazda opening up plants in Alabama. FedEx announcing wage increases, bonuses, pension funding, and U.S. capital investments, specifically citing Trump's tax plan again. Now, I understand that a lot of these are not 100% due to the tax plan, but when the company comes out and cites that as a specific motivator, you can't argue with it. All of this amounts to over 3 million workers getting tax cut bonuses. This also creates a very good environment for small businesses, as they can now deduct up to 20% of their business income from the taxes. And again, Trump used a civilian guest here from an Ohio company to really highlight this point. Now, one thing that Trump mentioned in terms of the economy that I wasn't a big fan of is that he ended the war on, quote, beautiful clean coal. Now, this is just propaganda. There's nothing beautiful or clean about coal, and really it's becoming an outdated way of harnessing energy. Still very lucrative, of course, but this is an appeal to his core fan base and the Rust Belt, which ultimately won him the election, so I do understand that. And along those lines, we can talk about how the United States withdrew from the Paris Accord, although Trump did not bring this up in his speech. The Paris Accord has more to do about global wealth redistribution than it really does about cleaning the environment. Trump also mentioned re-examination of trade deals and the enforcement of trade law. Specifically, one of the first things that he did as president was leave the Trans-Pacific Partnership and started renegotiating NAFTA. He talked about the importance of reciprocal bilateral trade agreements that are fair to the American workers. The next main topic of his speech focused on immigration, and I'll be honest and say that I don't like the strategy that he takes. I don't like the approach he utilizes to tackle this problem. While discussing this issue, he tends to focus on criminal illegal aliens committing horrendous acts on American soil. And while every murder and rape and occurrence of drug smuggling is horrendous and terrible and we should try to stomp it out of society, that's not the main problem that comes with immigration. And statistically speaking, it's only a minor issue. But when he makes the focus of immigration debate MS-13 and drugs and cartels and murders and rapes and criminal illegals, all he's doing really is giving the left an opportunity to attack him as a racist. It's easy for the left then to come out and ignore the economic implications of a weak immigration system and just say that Donald Trump is trying to paint all immigrants as drug members and murderers and rapists and then call them a racist from there. You saw Cory Booker and Chris Matthews do this in their response to the State of the Union address. And they went on to extrapolate that and say that because Donald Trump is equating all immigrants to rapists and murderers, that his entire State of the Union speech was hate-filled and just a giant cloud of fear-mongering. So it's not a very good strategy for Donald Trump to use these criminal illegals as the cornerstone of his immigration debate. What he should do instead is talk about the economic burden that sloppy immigration laws impose on the American people. The economy is a strong suit, and as people see more money in their paychecks, as they see better jobs as a result of the tax plan, they will be more willing to accept that perhaps Donald Trump is also right about economic protection in terms of immigration. Other issues that he could discuss in terms of immigration is the necessity for appropriate assimilation and the importance of maintaining American values in each and every person that we take into this country. He brought out another guest when he was addressing immigration, and that was that ICE agent CJ and how he was cracking down on all these violent illegals and arresting hundreds of them. But again, this is only a minor problem in terms of immigration reform, right? Although you'd be surprised to know that about 15% of the US prison population is composed of illegals, and something like 90% of foreign-born prisoners in the United States are illegal. So it obviously is a problem, but not the cornerstone of immigration. The economic burden that it places on the population, the lack of assimilation that some of these people have, and the demographic shift that occurs are much more important points. When low-skilled illegals make it across the border and set up shop in the United States and they don't assimilate, it's very burdensome for the American society. Somebody's going to have to pay for their health care. Somebody's going to have to pay for their kids to go to school and get an education. Somebody's going to have to pay for them to have more kids. Somebody's going to have to subsidize them when they can't find a job because they're illegal. Indirectly, people may try to hire these illegals to do jobs when an American who does not have a job could have gotten that work instead. I do like that Donald Trump emphasized that his priority is to the American people. That's who he was elected to represent after all, right? He used the line, "Americans are dreamers too," which I'm sure just sent a lot of people straight up into the trigger zone. But I think the point he's trying to make with that is that we need to prioritize our citizens over illegals. Why should we be taking in the illegal immigrants and providing housing and subsidies and education and healthcare when we have millions of American citizens who don't have those things? We have millions of American citizens who don't have jobs, they're impoverished, they can't afford healthcare, they can't find a good job, and instead of taking care of them, Democrats are proposing that we instead need to focus on the dreamers and all of these other illegal immigrants. And that's just not right. Trump did a good job to emphasize the fact that America does need to come first and its citizens need to be at the top of the priority list. He went on to systematically outline a 4-pillar immigration reform, and this you just can't argue with, okay? So let's talk about what he wants first from the Democrats. He wants border security with wall funding and increased funding for immigration enforcement personnel. He wants to close loopholes and terminate catch and release. All reasonable things. Something that I never understood with the immigration debate is the fact that people are so opposed to border security. What is wrong with border security and enforcing the law? I don't necessarily understand what opponents to this are arguing. Are you saying that we should provide no border security at all and just take in as many people as can fit into the United States? It just doesn't make sense why anybody would not be for enforcing border security. Somehow, if you want to approach the problem mathematically and try to derive how much immigration the country can accommodate with appropriate assimilation and without becoming an economic problem, somehow that becomes racist, and I never understood that. Donald Trump also called an end to the visa lottery, which again to me makes complete sense. Why would you want to randomly take in people with complete disregard to assimilation potential? the potential for criminal behavior, the potential economic burden that they can possess. Donald Trump is instead calling for a merit-based immigration system, which is basically what every other country on earth has, but somehow when the United States proposes it, it's racist. Does not make sense to me. Donald Trump is also wanting to end chain migration, limited to spouse and children only. Currently, an immigrant to the United States has tools available at his disposal to be able to bring in his extended family, and this circumvents a common sense-based immigration system. The chain migration problem has also been an issue with terrorist attacks in the past, right? We take in immigrants from high-risk areas in the Middle East, and perhaps they're properly vetted and they seem like they're going to be very good citizens, and maybe they are, but then they can bring in family members through chain migration who may not share those values, and that has certainly been exploited. What I would have liked to see more from Donald Trump is for him to speak more in terms of education. He only mentioned it briefly. Specifically, he talked about the need for more job training and vocational schools, which I think is an excellent point to make. As a society, the United States emphasizes a college education too much. We indoctrinate kids to think that the only way they'll ever have a good life is if they go to college. At the same time, we teach these kids that they need to go out and get a degree in something that they love, not necessarily something that's going to make them money. So what you get is a bunch of kids who can't afford to go to university taking out giant loans so that they can get their interpretive dance major or contemporary art major or gender studies major. And they've been told all their lives that if they just go to college and get a degree, they'll make good money and they'll live in a big house. And then they don't, right? Because they can't find a job with those majors and they're drowning in debt. And then they have to find somebody to blame. And that leads to all sorts of cultural issues. So when Donald Trump talks about the need for more job training and vocational schools, that is excellent. That's right on the nail. The idea that college is the only way that you can be successful in the world is absolutely crazy. And it has become an economic and social burden on our society. Now let me back up a little bit to the economy. I forgot to mention that Donald Trump brought up the fact that Black and Latin American unemployment rates have been at the lowest ever recorded. And again, it's impossible to say whether that's a direct result of his policies or if the previous administration had something to do with it, but that's all something we should celebrate, right? If Black unemployment and Latin American unemployment are low, that is something that we should be happy about. That's something we should be proud of. Instead, when the camera pans over to the Democrats and the Black Caucus, they all have scowls on their face. Something else that they like to scowl about is infrastructure, and Donald Trump made a few points on infrastructure. He made a $1.5 trillion proposal and asked for partnership with local governments and private companies to get this accomplished. And infrastructure reform also ties into the economy because you're going to need to create a lot of jobs to get all those projects done. And years and decades down the line, modern infrastructure allows companies to utilize that infrastructure to improve revenues. So it all works in together. A country can never ignore its infrastructure for too long and expect its economy to survive. A prime example of this is Venezuela. Under Hugo Chavez, when oil prices were up, he was exporting oil all over the world and making a ton of money. And what did he do with that money? He redistributed it to the people. That's how he was so popular. Classic socialist centralized economy. Everybody was happy because they were getting subsidized by the government with all that oil money. What happens when the oil prices tank though? All that money went away. All that wealth went away. People are literally starving in Venezuela right now. Malnourished children, inflation through the roof, the whole country is collapsing basically. And when Venezuela was doing well, leftists love to tout it as a prime example of how socialism can work. But as soon as things start going the other way, they distance themselves from it. Now what's the problem here? Hugo Chavez, when oil prices were high, should have used all that revenue to diversify the economy, to build infrastructure. But instead, he just wanted to create a socialist paradise by redistributing that wealth to all the people to improve his popularity. So when these oil prices fell, Venezuela had no other economic assets to rely on, and their infrastructure was completely decimated to where trying to bolster a new economic asset was pretty much impossible. That's a topic for another discussion though. Trump mentioned that a very important aspect of infrastructure repair relies on the reduction of permitting regulations. And I think he used an excellent example here because we all know that government bureaucracy only hinders things, makes things more expensive, makes things more inefficient and prolonged. And he used the example about how we built the Empire State Building in 1 year and now it takes about a decade to get permitting for a road. And I think that illustration really puts things into perspective for people who tune in to watch the speech. Trump went on to say how he has eliminated more regulations in his first year in office than any other administration in history, which is excellent. Again, all this regulation only makes things more expensive directly and indirectly. Directly because you have to hire all these people to enforce the regulations, and indirectly because time is money. If you have to circumvent your way around permitting regulations, that's costing you time and ultimately money. You're gonna have to lawyer up and get all these lawyers to make sure you're doing things by the book, and that costs money. So again, all this ties back to the economy. The government is there to ensure individual rights, not to dictate your life. Mandates and regulations are not the original intention of government, nor should they be. Donald Trump had a few points to make about the judiciary and how he has appointed more circuit court judges than any previous administration in history. He also went on to tout his appointment of Neil Gorsuch, and those are excellent things because they leave a long-lasting conservative impression on the nation long after he is out of office. I do wish he would have talked about some more cultural issues, but he did make a few points there. Specifically, tying into the main point of his speech is that we are all Americans with a civic duty. That's when he brought out that young boy who started the movement to place flags at the graves of fallen military personnel. I thought that was great content for his speech. He had a great line about how faith and family should be at the center of life, not government and bureaucracy. And that goes back to the founding principles of the government. The government is not here to dictate your life for you. The government is not here to give you everything that you need to live a fulfilling life. The government is here primarily to protect your individual rights to go out and make the life that you want to make. Its main duty is to protect your safety through law enforcement and national security. He talked about paid family leave, which he has been an advocate of ever since he was campaigning. In fact, his original budget accounted for paid family leave, and his daughter Ivanka Trump is working really hard on passing something in that regards. He did talk about the opioid epidemic, which is very important. As somebody who works in the healthcare field, I understand firsthand the effects that this can have and how it can destroy people's lives. I'm also aware of the lobbying from pharmaceutical companies to push these drugs on people and get them completely hooked. Donald Trump hasn't really provided any proposals on how he plans to deal with this, with the exception of maybe bringing up some possible treatment programs, but I'd like to see how he plans to tackle this. He did cite a statistic of 64,000 deaths due to drug overdose last year, which I haven't verified, but it wouldn't surprise me if the number's that high. Now the question is, how many of those are opioid drugs, prescription pills, compared to street drugs? I'd wager that a surprising percentage of that is going to be the prescription pain pills that you're getting from your doctor. What I don't like about what Trump did here is that he did tend to compare the opioid drug epidemic with drug dealing. I wish he would get a little bit more aggressive about the failures of the drug war. I don't think he will tackle that, especially with his Attorney General, Jeff Sessions. I think everybody on the right and left now agree that the drug war is a complete disaster. Marijuana should be legalized. An argument can be made to legalize even other substances, but that's a topic for another discussion. My hope is that one of the ways that he deals with the opioid epidemic issue is to call out all of the pharmaceutical lobbying for these prescription pills. It's sad how many lives these prescription pills destroy, how many people it kills, and how much money pharmaceutical companies are able to rake in from it due to lobbying. Meanwhile, we're throwing people in cages for smoking marijuana, a plant that has been shown time and time again to not have significant health risks. Certainly, relatively speaking, much more benign than these prescription pills. The exception, of course, is the developing brain people who are under the age of 21 or so who smoke marijuana. There has been some association with the development of schizophrenia there, but as a responsible adult, it is a very benign substance. It's especially shocking when you compare it to the tobacco industry, which of course lobbies in Washington, how many people cigarettes kill, how much money it sucks out of the healthcare system. Basically every disease known to man is impacted and made worse by the smoking of cigarettes, but nobody seems to have a problem with that. In fact, just today the CDC director resigned because they found out that she owned stock in tobacco. Now, along the line of prescription drugs, Trump did touch briefly on healthcare. Specifically, he talked about his repeal of the individual mandate on Obamacare, which was just a brief line there. The government shouldn't be forcing you to buy healthcare, especially when it's to subsidize a failing system. He talked about terminal patients and how they should have access to experimental drugs, and this of course makes sense. Patients shouldn't have to go out of the country to seek this, and preventing access to these experimental drugs prevents scientific progress in the long run. He also emphasized that one of the top priorities for him this year is going to be reducing the price of prescription drugs. I have no idea how he plans on accomplishing this, but if he can do it, that'll be a very big win. Prescription drugs are one of the primary costs in the healthcare system. Trump went on to talk about the military and foreign policy, which kind of go hand in hand. He talked about VA reform. He did pass a VA Accountability Act, which is excellent because it finally allows for the firing of bad personnel who weren't really doing their job. It used to be that to fire somebody from the VA was almost an impossible thing to do, but now there's finally some accountability there. And he did go on to talk about the importance of modernizing and rebuilding our nuclear arsenal. And what the left loves to criticize about Trump is that he's Orange Hitler and he's going to start the next nuclear holocaust because he's unhinged. So they're going to jump all over this, I think, and say, oh, look, Donald Trump wants to build nuclear weapons because he wants to blow everyone up. But you need to understand nuclear deterrence and mutually assured destruction. In the current global climate, the only way that you can prevent a nuclear war is to assure that anybody who attacks you is going to be mutually destroyed. Again, the principle of mutually assured destruction. The only way this works is if American nuclear technology is up to par with the nuclear technology of our competitors. Imagine, for example, if Russia or China expanded their nuclear technologies and capabilities while the United States refused to do so. That would put those two countries at an advantage and give them even more incentive to provoke a war where otherwise they might not do so. To emphasize the importance of nuclear deterrence and mutually assured destruction, I'll take you back to the years after World War II. Winston Churchill was actually making an argument that the United States should use its nuclear weapons on the Soviet Union to prevent the spread of communism and also to prevent the Russians from getting a nuclear arsenal. General Patton also insinuated this and said that the only way for the United States to keep its advantage would be to be the only country on Earth to have access to nuclear weapons, and he had even proposed the possibility of preemptive nuclear strikes on Russia to prevent them from acquiring nuclear weapons. Thankfully, cooler heads prevailed there and that never happened, and now it can never happen because Russia has their own nuclear arsenal and therefore nuclear deterrence and mutually assured destruction should the United States try to strike them. Think, for example, if the situation is reversed though. If Russia finds itself in a position that it thinks it has a nuclear advantage over the United States, should they take that opportunity to take out one of their competitors? Hopefully they never have to answer that question if we have a modernized and rebuilt nuclear arsenal, which is what Trump is arguing for. In regards to terrorism or the Middle East, Trump is obviously trying to claim victory over ISIS. It is true that ISIS is all but decimated from Iraq and Syria, but for him to take credit for it is a little bit disingenuous. The United States, in my opinion, has played a minor role in this. The primary victory against ISIS comes from the efforts of Assad in Russia. Politically, Trump is right. He should try to take every piece of credit for this that he can. He made the argument to keep Guantanamo Bay open. There are several terrorists who were interrogated at Guantanamo Bay, were released, and then went on to fight again and kill Americans even. So to keep a military prison open is a good idea. Some people are going to talk about human rights and all that kind of stuff, which is fine. Those are valuable concerns to raise. They're going to try and paint Trump as Hitler as always, but remember that Barack Obama promised to close Guantanamo Bay and he kept it open, so he just shoved the issue to the side and never talked about it, which is effectively the same policy that Trump is trying to enact by keeping Guantanamo Bay open. The difference being that Donald Trump is willing to admit it and state the importance of that policy, whereas Obama would rather try to sweep it under the rug and act like he's benevolent. Continuing along the road of foreign policy, Donald Trump did talk about how he moved the capital of Israel to Jerusalem, which is something that I disagree with, but that's a topic for another discussion. The point here being previous administrations, including Barack Obama and Bill Clinton and George Bush, have all called to move the capital of Israel to Jerusalem. It's just that Donald Trump was the first one to actually have the guts to do what he said he was going to do. Importantly, the president talked about re-examination of how we distribute foreign aid. It's pathetic and humiliating that countries antagonize us and then take a bunch of our money, and the fact that he's bringing that to light is important. And then went on to spend a good deal of time on North Korea. He talked about some of his accomplishments and some of his strategies, such as exerting maximum pressure and departing from previous foreign policy strategies of simple containment and drawing red lines, which obviously has not worked. I think Donald Trump has done a decent job on North Korea. In fact, the South Korean president has credited Donald Trump and his tough actions to bringing North Korea to the negotiating table, so that's quite an accomplishment. Curious to see how he continues to handle the North Korean problem. Sanctions ultimately are not going to work, and the reason for that is that the consequences of sanctions has to be more severe than the negotiated loss. And what I mean by that is Donald Trump and his Western allies and his Asian allies alike are imposing sanctions on North Korea and saying that they will take these sanctions off the table if Kim Jong-un stops his nuclear program. So you have to understand here that the dictator's regime is completely dependent on this nuclear arsenal. That's basically how he has consolidated his power and how he has dealt with foreign aggressors that would seek to undermine his regime or even depose of him. In short, his rule is completely tied to his nuclear arsenal and his nuclear development program. So there's no amount of sanctions, no matter how rough they are, they will never give him a loss bigger than the one he would face if he took away his nuclear program. That's why sanctions will never work on the North Korean regime. So I think that covers all the points that he brought up during the State of the Union, and now I can get to my favorite part that I've been looking forward to during this rant, and that is the Democratic response to this whole thing. Obviously, they sat there with a sour look on their face the entire time, and that's pretty predictable. That's generally how the State of the Union goes, and that's not just a Democratic thing, it's usually an opposition thing. That is to say, when Barack Obama was making his State of the Union addresses, the Republicans did the same thing, so it's not something specific to one party or the other. But it is quite sad, and it does highlight some of the problems with democracy, because in effect what the opposition party is doing is hoping that the country is not doing well. They're hoping that the president is failing. They're sad at the president's accomplishments, and it really is quite sickening. The primary example here being the economic reforms and the tax reform that has unanimously helped pretty much everybody across the board. It's objective. The tax reform is a great thing for the country. The Democrats know this, but they can't admit it, because doing so would be a huge political defeat for them. So they have to spin this story, and their go-to, of course, is being that the economic reform is all going to the top and that ordinary Americans are struggling still and that this is going to hurt them. And we all know that's false. And voters know that's false. And the voters who don't know that's false will know it's false when they start getting their new paychecks with the new tax cuts in place. So when things are going well for Donald Trump, what the Democrats have to do is rely on identity politics like they always do. So that's why you see Nancy Pelosi dressed in black with her gaggle of women dressed in black as well, all thinking highly of themselves and thinking they're making a very important social statement. They all decided to go out dressed in black in an homage to the hashtag #MeToo movement. And my question is, what does this have to do with the State of the Union? And as you should know, truth is not reality. Perception is reality. So by going out dressed in black, they're creating the perception that Donald Trump is a sexist and that he doesn't care about women, and perception is reality. So that's what they're trying to do there. But again, my question is, what does this hashtag #MeToo thing have to do with the State of the Union? What does it have to do with the economy? What does it have to do with healthcare? What does it have to do with the military? What does it have to do with foreign policy? They want to try and portray Trump as a misogynist and a hater of women, but the truth of the matter is that women are doing very well under Trump's policies as well. They want to make innuendos about Trump's past sexual improprieties. Now, I'm not going to deny that he's a womanizer, but there is a very clear distinction between Trump's so-called sexual scandals and Democratic sexual scandals. That main difference being that Trump's sexual improprieties are all consensual in nature. Now, I'm not going to be a hypocrite here. I will be the first to say that I don't care about Bill Clinton's affair with Monica Lewinsky because that was consensual, so why should I care? But the glaring hypocrisy here is that Bill Clinton actually did go on to rape other people in a non-consensual fashion, and Hillary Clinton always covered up for him. Now, my favorite part about this whole thing with Nancy Pelosi and all those women coming out dressed in black as an homage to all women who have been sexually abused is that in the middle of the State of the Union address, Hillary Clinton went out and put a statement about why she never fired Bernd Strider. For those of you who don't know, Bernd Strider was working on her campaign in 2008, and several women accused him of sexually harassing them. And in the middle, Hillary Clinton goes out to defend why she never fired him. She said she wanted to give him a second chance, and her senior advisors at the time told her to fire him because of these sexual improprieties, and she overruled them. So it's hilarious how they try to paint their Republican Party and Trump as a hater of women. Meanwhile, their champion Hillary Clinton is at the very same moment trying to excuse herself for giving a second chance to a rapist. Now, they also try to bring race into this. There's photo ops of these Black Caucus members doing the Black Power fist. Great way to bring unity to the nation, huh? They also wear Reese pins. And for those of you who don't know, Reese was a black woman who was raped in 1944 by 6 white men. And now, to me, it's just incredible that they decided it's a good idea to wear a pin about a rape that occurred over half a century ago And again, they're trying to make a perception of reality here. The perception being that evil white men are going out and raping black women, and that white people are oppressing the blacks here, and that women don't have a voice. And it's funny because they have to dig back all the way to 1944 to get an example of this. This is the message the Democrats are trying to portray. This is their response to Trump doing well with his policies, is to bring up these issues from the past that have little to no relevance in today's society. If you're going to be digging that far back for an example of social maljustice, why don't we talk about the zebra murders in the 70s when a gang of 4 black men purposely went out hunting for white victims, killing at least 15 of them, raping all the women before the murders? Or how about in the 90s when this girl named Melissa was kidnapped by 3 black men who raped her and then went out to the street to pass the word that they, quote, captured a white woman, and then more people came in to rape them. 3 more black guys came in to rape her. Or in 2013, more recently, a black football player from Vanderbilt filmed himself and his teammates raping a white woman, and while he was pissing on her face, he said, quote, that's for 400 years of slavery, bitch. Now, there's really no point in me bringing up all these black on white rape cases, but that's kind of a point in itself, because the Democrats' main response here is to bring out a bunch of black women wearing a pin about a white on black rape that occurred in 1944. Again, their main goal is to paint this picture that America today is just a land of white supremacy where white men go out and victimize women, they go out and they victimize minorities, and that Trump is directly responsible for all of this. Now, if you want to talk about facts, you'll know that black on white rape is certainly way more common than the reverse. Now, in 2005, the Department of Justice published some crime statistics in which about 110,000 white women claimed to have been raped, and 34% of those rapes were committed by a black person. Now, more interesting is that of the 37,000 black victims, 99.9% of them claimed to be raped by a black perpetrator. There were less than 10 white on black rapes reported. So the Democrats trying to play this image of all these white men taking advantage of all the black minorities and raping women is just not based on evidence at all. Unfortunately, we don't have much better data on interracial crime statistics because in 2009, when Obama put Eric Holder in charge of the Justice Department, that information is now withheld. Now, my favorite part about the whole Democrat response is Nancy Pelosi holding a press conference with the Dreamers before the State of the Union. It's hilarious because they have completely lost on this argument as well. Remember how I talked about the issues that Donald Trump had proposed in his immigration talk during the State of the Union? Well, here's what he was offering to concede in return for those. He has offered a path to citizenship for 1.8 million illegal immigrants, and that's more than 3 times what was proposed by the Obama administration. I'm not here to say whether that's a good proposal or not. I personally think it's not, but that's besides the fact. The point is that during the Obama years, he wanted to grant amnesty to 800,000 Dreamers, and most people thought there were only 800,000 Dreamers, but those were only the ones who registered. There are far more than that. The fact that Donald Trump is willing to offer a path to citizenship for 1.8 million of them, more than the Democrats had ever hoped to get through, is just very impressive and completely checkmates the Democrats, because now they can't play that racist card. They can't say that Donald Trump wants to deport all these people, and the ball is in their court. If they refuse to cooperate with this immigration reform, they're the ones effectively saying no to 1.8 million illegal immigrants. The fact that the Democrats do not want to make a deal on this makes it abundantly clear that they don't care about the Dreamers. They don't care about illegal immigrants. They just want to use them as a bargaining chip. They just want to race bait Republicans with that issue. Anybody who sincerely cares about these Dreamers and these 1.8 million people would be crazy to not take the deal that Donald Trump is offering. And you saw Nancy Pelosi scowling when Donald Trump was talking about his proposal to grant the pathway to citizenship for 1.8 million people. Now, towards the end of the speech, when Donald Trump was honoring all of the American people for what they have done throughout history, and chants of USA broke out in the chamber, Luis Gutierrez walked out. Apparently, that was just too much for him. And it truly highlights the fact that the Democrats' contempt for Donald Trump and the Republican Party goes way beyond that. They're not just anti-Trump, they're straight up anti-American. They are striving for a global, postmodern, neo-Marxist society in which the United States is just a construct. So anything that is inherently American or independent is something that they're going to oppose. And that came out very clearly. Now, Luis Gutierrez later claimed that Donald Trump is a racist, obviously, because he complained that Puerto Rico wasn't mentioned because of the hurricanes that happened there. But that's complete nonsense. Towards the beginning of the speech, when Donald Trump was talking about the wildfires in California and the hurricanes and flooding in Houston, he specifically mentioned that the United States stands with the people of Puerto Rico and all the other areas affected by natural disasters. He specifically barely mentioned Puerto Rico, so I don't know what Gutierrez is on about. He later went on to say, quote, "Whoever translated it for him from Russian did a good job." And it just shows you how delusional this guy really is. Now, one Democrat that does deserve credit is Joe Manchin from West Virginia. He was the only Democratic senator to stand up and clap, and he drew gazes from Chuck Schumer, piercing his soul pretty much. He was getting some eye rolls there. One thing that I would absolutely love to do if I had the chance to interview any Democrat is to ask them, can you please name 5 things that you think Donald Trump has done well? Could you imagine them squirming in their chair if that question was asked? It's very sad that they can't observe the good, and if they do, they have to pretend like it's not there. Or worse and more cynically, they have to hope that good things don't happen, or taking it further, they have to try to sabotage certain things for political gain. The best part of the response from the Democratic Party was the fact that they wheeled out good old Joe Kennedy to come out and address everybody. It's obvious that his entire speech was crafted on emotion and identity politics and not on facts. The liberal apparatus is trying to create the perception that he's very well spoken and very charismatic, but I didn't see that at all. His speech felt very disingenuous. You could tell that he was really just trying to appeal to emotion by the way he was talking, with a sad little voice and long pauses in between sentences, almost as if he's trying to get people to start crying or something. Now, it's also obvious that the Democratic Party put him out there to kind of test the waters and see how people respond to him, to see if he may be a viable presidential candidate. They threw him out there without a suit, just a shirt and a tie, try and connect with the youth there and try to look a little bit more connectable, and they put that automobile in the background to try and present the imagery that he may be an economy president to get the economy going again. But it's hilarious because this backfires completely, right? Because it brings out the great irony of bringing out Joe Kennedy to appeal to emotion and play identity politics. The irony is that he's a straight white male from one of the most prominent families in the country. He's a multi-millionaire. His family comes from a reputation of sexual harassment and disrespect of women. And the best part of them trying to use the car manufacturing as a backdrop, trying to suggest that he's going to do good for the economy, is of course that his great uncle Ted Kennedy, who was probably womanizing a 28-year-old girl and driving her home while drunk, he ended up driving into a lake and waited until the next morning to call the police, and they found poor Mary Jo dead there. It's pretty obvious that he was drinking and driving, and that's why he waited till the next morning and thought it was more important for him to avoid jail than to try and save this woman's life. But that's the first thing that I thought of when I saw that car in the background. Now, Ted Kennedy, later on in the 90s, went on to go pick up some girls with his nephew and then walked in on his nephew raping one of the girls. He later defended him from the woman's accusations. So that's the irony, right? They're trying to play the identity politics game, but they pick out one of the worst possible people to do this. Joe Kennedy got up there and he was a slobbering mess. He tried to say that it was lip gloss, but it was on the side of his mouth. He just looked gross. He's a dynastic politician. I mean, how many more Clintons and Bushes and Kennedys do we have to have in politics, right? He started out his speech saying that he's in a city built by immigrants, and that's just to set the tone of the whole identity politics game that he wants to play. He says he's there to hear the voices of the Americans who are forgotten and feel forsaken, which is funny because those are the people who elected Donald Trump. He briefly addressed Trump's economy by again trying to make the point that as the stocks soar, it's only the CEOs and the rich people who are making that money. But that argument defeats itself when people get their checks in the mail and see that the tax cuts benefit them tremendously. You can't have a Democratic rebuttal without bringing up Russia, so Joe Kennedy, of course, brings up Russia is knee-deep in our democracy. Complete BS, as everybody knows by now. Now, I'll say again, perception is reality. So this whole time, he couldn't argue on the facts that Trump made during his State of the Union address, so he has to rely on creating a perception that is completely false. The perception being that the streets are ruled by white supremacists targeting minorities and keeping people down. And he said things such as, quote, "The Justice Department is rolling back civil rights by the day." Somebody please tell me what he means by that. What policies have been enacted that have rolled back civil rights? Joe Kennedy went on to say that hatred and white supremacy are proudly marching in the streets. Again, complete nonsense. He says that in Trump's America, we live in a country where dignity is measured by net worth and celebrity status, or the gender of your spouse, or country of origin, or color of the skin. And again, this is glaring hypocrisy, right? Because this guy has the celebrity status and he's got the net worth. And meanwhile, Trump made his speech about American unity and how we're all Americans regardless of any of those things. Joe Kennedy, instead of addressing the economy or coming up with a Democratic platform for the midterms or even the next presidential election, he thinks the most pressing issues facing the country today are, quote, parents staying awake at night in fear that their transgender kid is going to get made fun of in school. Apparently that's the most pressing issue of the nation. He then shifted the criticism to his proposed solutions. He said that Democrats choose both. He argued for affordable wage and paid family leave. And this is hilarious because, as I talked about earlier, under the Trump tax cuts, wages have increased, workers got bonuses, companies are reinvesting in America. All those three things happening, citing specifically Trump's tax plans by companies. And the paid family leave, again, it's something that Trump has advocated for ever since he was campaigning and something that Ivanka Trump is working on. Joe Kennedy went on to say that it's important to make trade deals that are fair. Are you kidding me? That's exactly what Trump is doing. By removing the United States from the TPP, by renegotiating NAFTA, by advocating for bilateral trade agreements. Next, Joe Kennedy says that we need, quote, roads and bridges that won't rust away. Did you miss the part of the State of the Union when Donald Trump talked about a $1.5 trillion proposal for infrastructure repair? So all these things that he's proposing are specifically things that Donald Trump has not only addressed in his speech, but also had successes in through legislation. And again, I know I sound like a broken record here, but this is why the Democrats are relying on creating a perception of Donald Trump as pure evil and relying on identity politics because they can't argue with domestic and foreign policy. I think one of the things that most people took away from Joe Kennedy's speech was when he addressed the Dreamers in Spanish, saying that, quote, we will fight for you and not walk away. And what I say to that is just watch them. Watch them. They will walk away. They have to walk away. Again, Trump offered a pathway to citizenship for close to 3 times as many citizens as Obama had proposed. So who's fighting for the Dreamers? Is it Trump or is it the Democrats who are unwilling to sign immigration reform and leaving those 1.8 million people to the curb? So watch them walk away. The Democrats won't accept this pathway to citizenship. The Dreamers are just a tool, but Joe Kennedy wants to act like he's the champion of these dreamers. His campaign slogan should be, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for other countries. Because apparently for him, illegal immigrants are more important than Americans. He also gave some shout outs to the hashtag #MeToo and the Black Lives Matter movement. So just a very pathetic and predictable response from the Democrats. All playing to emotion, all playing to painting a fake notion that white supremacists are running the country at the expense of minorities, and all playing to identity politics. The main issue is that it really highlights that the Democrats have no real solution and no real counter to Trump's economy and his proposed immigration reforms. And that's really the meat and bones of what's happening currently.